Brought to you by the University of Alaska Fairbanks, Department of Social Work, and the Conscious Party Productions. You are listening to The Critical Social Worker, a revolutionary storytelling podcast.
A conscious party.
Revolutionizing our minds.
Elevating our consciousness.
Changing our worlds.
Your story.
My story.
Our story.
You have another article that says when we talk about decolonizing social work, what do we mean by that? Something like that. Do you mind answering that question?
Yeah, I mean, in this forms, I guess, a chapter in the book Social Work and Common Sense, and there's a similar piece in the British Journal of Social Work. And I suppose one of the things I was attempting to do there was just to try and explain some of the terms which are often kind of bandied around, which are not kind of unpacked. So, you know, I look at the old notion of kind of decolonization and decolonizing the university. And I guess my starting point for that investigation was a mix of things. And thinking historically, maybe one of the first prompts is this. Many decades ago, in the 1980s, I was an undergraduate student at the University of California in San Diego. And I had the privilege of being a student for a year in one of the colleges there that was often referred to as Third College. Now, Third College was tremendously kind of radical, because even though the term decolonizing social work wasn't used then, there was an endeavor within Third College to move beyond kind of American and European ways of doing stuff in terms of how the college was run. And the college was kind of hated by ruling elites in California. It was hated by figures like Ronald Reagan at the time and so on, but it kind of ignited something for me in terms of trying to get my head around perspectives which were very kind of insular and tied in with kind of colonialism. And I think that kind of stayed with me. So there was that deep historical kind of context going back decades. And then more recently, I was involved in supervising a PhD with a Zimbabwean guy, a guy called Washington Maravatsanga. And reaching over again for another advert coming up with Christian, we produced this book, Social Work with the Black African Diaspora. And in that book, we looked at kind of knowledges flowing from Africa and so on in a kind of critical way. That's not to say we argued that everything to do with kind of European knowledge should be extinguished, because that's a rather silly idea, isn't it? So I had the kind of Californian experience. I had the work with Washington. Lots going on in UK universities, particularly in relation to decolonizing the university. So that underpinned my investigation. So and I'd also done some work on, and I'm not sure if he's familiar to your students, done some work on Frantz Fanon.
I'm familiar, but I doubt that most of my students are familiar with that yet.
Very interesting guy to kind of look at. For students listening, I guess, I mean, he was involved in the struggle for Algerian independence and so on. But in terms of social work specifically, he was also a practicing psychiatrist, and he did some kind of fascinating work. So he would pay reward students to kind of explore his work. So going back to the specific question around the article in the chapter, I look to kind of engage with, well, what do we mean by decolonisation? What do we mean by decolonising the university? What do we mean by Eurocentrism? What do we mean by more complex terms like decoloniality and so on? So I tried to kind of map that terrain in what I hope was a kind of accessible way that might serve as a kind of an accessible teaching aid for kind of social work students and so on. And in that sense, I'd be happy to hear from any of your student listeners today. You want to email me to give me some responses or ask questions in relation to, the article is in the British Journal of Social Work. It's available online and it's open access. It's not behind a firewall or anything, or a paywall, I should say.
And which article was that?
It's an article called "What Do We Mean When We're Talking About Decolonizing Social Work?"
This episode was recorded live on Wednesday, April 17th, 2024. This episode featured Dr. Paul Michael Garrett, and it was hosted by Christian Ace Stetler. Brought to you by the University of Alaska Fairbanks, Department of Social Work, this has been a Conscious Party production. You've been listening to The Critical Social Worker, a revolutionary storytelling podcast. Your story, my story, our story. All right, until next time, everybody, keep being revolutionary. Peace.